not yourself because of evildoers. Put your trust in the Lord and do good. Take our hands, take our minds and think through them. Take our hands and work through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for Christ's sake. Amen. Peace. So, where is your trust, or lack of trust, these days? I must admit, my trust level is not great. I have deep concerns that there are many fellow citizens, especially many who call themselves Christians, who, if they thought they could get away with it or profit from it, they would round up people like me and put us in detention camps. And I'm not sure how many of my fellow citizens would fight to prevent such an injustice. I don't trust many corporate CEOs care about much more than their stock prices or their platinum parachutes. I don't trust that free markets are actually free, and that our future as an economically mobile and democratic society is secure. Trust is not an easy topic, and certainly not a comfortable one. However, considering the uncertainties that we face in our world, trust may be the most topical and difficult theme that we could be tackling. Lack of trust seems to be as infectious as any virus and as prevalent as ignorance. I mean, people don't even trust medical professionals and scientists. And they certainly don't trust politicians or governmental institutions or the press, and even the church, our justice system, including the Supreme Court, and educational professionals are looked upon with distrust. Now, much of this distrust has been carefully nurtured and even manufactured, especially by those who are at odds with our society and our democratic institutions, because distrust makes us more vulnerable and more likely to turn on each other as we seek to pin blame for our problems. The cynicism it engenders makes it more likely that we just throw up our hands and withdraw, leaving a power vacuum that our detractors are all too willing to fill. Trust has been so turned upside down that some of our leaders are singing the praises of foreign dictators and disrespecting our closest allies. Do we trust that our common future holds much promise? Now, historically, some individuals and institutions have earned a degree of distrust, even the church. But despite the failures of some institutions, our faith tradition offers us hope. Our scriptures illustrate and enrich our understanding of trust through numerous stories of promise, betrayal, disappointment, and renewal. And they are great places to start. This week, all three scriptures are extraordinary illustrations of the struggle and promise of trust. I mean, even the psalmist ties together this overarching theme. Put your trust in the Lord, because it matters who we trust. Look at our Genesis narrative. Imagine being Joseph's brothers and realizing that the brother that they thought they had left for dead in a pit was now lord over Egypt, and that they were at his mercy. They expected judgment and revenge. Imagine trusting that someone you tried to destroy would be your salvation. Imagine Joseph trusting that God had been with him through all of this horrible ordeal, and that his brothers could and should be forgiven. Trusting that God had in fact used him and his sufferings for the salvation of the very people who had betrayed him. Wow. That is trust. Luke continues Jesus' famous teaching moment from last week with some of the toughest and most counterintuitive admonitions. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Lend and expect nothing in return. Judge not, condemn not, forgive and be forgiven. Ooh, it's asking a bit much. How do we trust that we won't be taken for chumps? Those passages challenge us because God's ways are so inscrutable and counter to our human values. To radically trust in a love of a generous God, we must often give up our cherished notions of the truth. Where we belong, who belongs with us, who's worthy, who's unworthy, how we're to respond to threats, how to risk an entirely new approach to God, the world, to life, to death. And God says, fear not. I will be with you through all of it. Trust me. Obey me. And that's a tall order. In his second letter to the Corinthians, right after arguing that the resurrection is essential to the Christian faith, Paul disabused his audience of their simplistic, literalistic conception of the resurrection and challenged them to embrace the mystery of resurrected life and the possibility that its exact form may vary from person to person, like different types of seeds yielding their own unique blooms. And considering Paul's challenge to reconsider the meaning and form of resurrection, can we trust God enough to be open to the unexpected ways that we might experience our resurrections here and now? I mean, throughout history, we've been bombarded with rigorous and rigid interpretations of Christian doctrines, some of which aren't even biblically rooted. So we're left asking, well, without insisting that there was a reanimated corpse, can Christianity survive? What? Much less be seen as legitimate? Because last week Paul was arguing for a bodily resurrection, but this week he qualifies that the bodily resurrection may not be what we think. So which is it? Talk about ambiguity. And ambiguity never feels safe. We don't like to change our minds or admit that we don't know or have been mistaken or, worse yet, duped. It's one of the reasons that our world has become so polarized. Humility is seen as weakness, grace as ineffectual. The only thing that many people trust is power, be it physical, political, spiritual, or psychological. And that's why our president backs Putin and aligns himself with the oligarchs instead of us. It's why Russia invaded Ukraine and hopes to retake the Baltic states and neuter NATO. It's why principled public servants are being fired by those who want loyalty above law and self-dealing before accountability. And it's why so many who think they're pro-life feel the need to criminalize other people's desperate choices rather than address the factors that could minimize the perceived need for such tragic decisions. And it's why some parents are so afraid that their children will grow up as independent thinkers that they seek to ban books and ideas and relationships and the histories of their neighbors that they wish didn't exist. It's hard having our trusted criteria for salvation called into question. It's hard having our traditions turned on their heads and being called to trust that God is at work, especially when its form seems contrary to what we've been told all our lives. I mean, maybe our physical body won't resuscitate. Maybe the mystery of Jesus' resurrection can only be communicated metaphorically. But considering it's so hard to trust each other, it's no wonder we grapple with evolving understandings of God and theology and sacraments and marriage and life and sexuality. And how do we trust in God when the world and the church seem like they're on such shaky ground? That's the core of our dilemma. We can't claim to trust God and then impose our own will, especially on others. But in the midst of pessimism and fear and distrust, we need a deeper love affair with Jesus. In fact, for me, it's when I feel most vulnerable that I experience my most acute need for that love. And it's in those moments when I'm at the end of my rope that I have to surrender to that love. We're in the middle of what is probably the most cynical and conflicted eras of our lifetime. And many are so disaffected and so distrustful that we have some of the deepest divisions, paranoid ideologies, and levels of cynicism of any democracy in the world. And perhaps, though, that's even more reason to surrender to Christ's love. Like Joseph, we need to come to the point where we can say, no, God is using me. I am a part of God's plan for salvation, even if I don't understand how. Even though many who are bewildered or angry may look on me with suspicion. And that's understandable. Because many Christians are feeding this atmosphere of anxiety and distrust and have acted more like fountains of fear and hate than love and forgiveness. I hear those voices in my own head. I hear it from my own lips. But that's even more reason we must heed our gospel's call to love our enemies and do good, expecting nothing in return. Our reward will be great, and we will be children of the Most High, for He is kind, even to the ungrateful and the wicked. It's hard to let go, though, of our notions of justice and trust, that God is not just active in our lives, but also everyone else's. God can continue the redemptive process whether our agenda prevails or not. Whether we get the last word in an argument, whether corporate criminals or corrupt politicians are punished with the same vigor as the poor, the addicted, and the marginalized, and whether or not we personally see the world, much less our nation, put right in our lifetimes. It's possible that all of us will see more division, conflict, and injustice in the near future. But nevertheless, God is asking us to trust in the salvation and healing of the world, and that we are a part of it. Jesus offers us the possibility that God is most present and most tangible when we do exactly the opposite of what society expects. When we have recklessly given away or risked too much. When we have audaciously trusted. Not that humans will respond responsibly, but that God will be with us even without interest earned or principal repaid. Without assurance that those we forgive will behave as we expected. Without knowing that loving our enemies will preempt the next mass shooting or neo-Nazi rally or terrorist attack. Before we can trust that love overcomes death, we need to embrace love. and the fact that God has given us resilient hearts that can love and be loved without condition, that frees us. It frees us to engage the world boldly, knowing that perhaps we'll have less trouble understanding that resurrection and salvation may be different than what we expect, and then start seeing the myriad resurrections at work in the world around us. That's the trust that we are called to. And that's the trust that Christ places in us. Thanks be to God.